What is up, and welcome back to another episode of the Wizards Podcast. I'm your host, Greg Finberg, and today's episode, we're going to be talking about some recent reports linking Zion Williamson to the Washington Wizards. Again, I should mention at the beginning, they are, early reports and considered a long shot in the reports, but it's definitely something to talk about after the Trae Young trade and how before that, a couple of days when it was reported, it seemed like it was sort of a long shot, might happen, might not. And then you look forward a couple of days later, and Trae Young is in D.C. For the Washington Wizards, a part of that trade. So, again, we're going to break that down for you. Not a recap. Again, the Wizards don't play till Thursday against the Nuggets. So, a bit of a different pod, might be shorter. But I wanted to sort of give you my thoughts on Zion. We're going to break down why I honestly don't hate it for the Wizards if they do make the trade, but also why I could understand the people that would be against it. Going to break down his contract and why that's honestly not that bad in terms of the contract moving forward. We'll talk about the games that he's missed, his production, and also offer what a possible trade package would look like. So that's going to be what we're going to be discussing in the show. And I want to start it off by sort of reading out the reports again. If you missed it, the Athletics, Joshua Robbins put out a report today that was sort of talking about the Wizards and some trade stuff. Mentioned the Trae Young trade as well. And he said that, look, the Pelicans have reportedly told teams that they're not going to trade a bunch of the young guys and play guys that are playing well, like Zion and Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, Derek Queen, Jeremiah Fears, etc. But he said, as it pertains to Williamson, league sources have expressed skepticism to The Athletic about that report, basically saying league sources are skeptical that the Pelicans won't move Zion Williamson. They believe that it's possible they will if the trade is right. He also said league sources can't envision any scenario where the Wizards give up one of its own future first round picks. Again, that's not that's not a shock. You knew the Wizards wouldn't want to trade any of their future picks when they're trying to rebuild. They're not at the point where they want to accelerate the rebuild and try to contend. So that would be a pretty dumb move by them. But again, I feel like Josh mentioned, it's worth mentioning. He said, quote, to be crystal clear, the Wizards trading Williamson for Williamson appears to be an extreme long shot, but it was mentioned as a possibility by enough league sources that it should be mentioned here, end quote. Again, Josh's story is in full in The Athletic. You need a subscription. You got to pay for it. So I don't know who has access to that. But what I'm reading is off Bullets Forever. It's a little excerpt that we put out today. So you can kind of read that a little bit on bulletsforever.com. But again, that's Josh's report, and I feel like it's enough. It's noteworthy enough considering it's a possibility monetarily and for both teams' future that happens. So that's sort of the report. And now that you've heard that, should the Wizards have interest in Zion Williamson? Before we get into the contract, before we get into possible trade packages, like why would they do this? I'm sure you're thinking, like, Greg, why would the Wizards do this? They're in a really good place in their rebuild. They just had a great game from some of the young guys. Sarr had 28, George had 18, 17 for Bub, 15 for Trey, efficient shooting from all four. You obviously have guys like Will Riley that have given you some really good minutes. Bilal Coulibaly has been awesome on the defensive end when he's been able to stay healthy. You went 7-5 in that stretch, and you're still in a really good position to keep your pick this year. And you're able to maybe get someone like Boozer or Peterson or to advance in the draft. Like, your rebuild's looking great if you're the Wizards. You own all your picks. You have future picks, good salary cap management. Like, all that considered, why would you make a trade for an injury-prone 25-year-old who really doesn't have much value around the league? And is on a pretty hefty contract, can never stay healthy. Why would you do that at this point in your rebuild? And that's a completely fair question to ask. But those questions were also being asked about Trae Young. He's a bit older. I think Trae is 28 right now. Again, injury prone. He's dealt with ankle injuries most of his career. This year, the MCL, the contusion in the quad. Like, he's had his fair share of injuries. He's also on a pretty hefty contract that was also this year and a player option next year. And the primary motivation for the Hawks was, hey, we're not getting anything back remotely close to the value that Trae Young had 2-3 years ago. But this is his value now. We need to kind of come back down to reality and say, our primary motivation is not to get back the value that we probably could have gotten a year ago or 2 years ago. We're not going to chase that. We just want to get off his contract. And the Wizards, because of that Pelicans trade, right? They already trade partners familiar with each other in the trade market for McCollum. They were able to dump that expiring salary for Atlanta. Again, Trae Young's value is probably more than that. They probably thought at some point in the beginning of the year, last year, they could get multiple picks, multiple ones. But the Wizards jumped on an opportunity to say, hey, he's only under contract for next year if he opts in. We can still extend him if it works. He fits a position of need. And, if it doesn't, it's fine. We move off when we have the cap space. We got to pay someone to get to the salary floor anyway. And that's why they made the trade. I thought it was a good trade at the time, would have liked to get draft capital in return, but they didn't. Still like that trade. The Zion thing is pretty similar. It's not the same thing by any means. Like, it's not completely similar, but you can see, right, the similarities in terms of if you said that Zion could possibly be dealt 2, 3 years ago, you would have teams lining up to say, hey, here's 2, 3 first round picks, maybe even more, because he was 22. He had some injuries, but he had a really good rookie year. He made, I think, All NBA in 23, 24, or maybe the year before when he was healthy. Like, he's a very good player, and teams were lining up. But again, there's been a lot of injuries. There's been some off-court stuff. There's been some weight issues. That team does not value him the way that they used to, and neither do the other 29 teams around the league. And if the Pelicans are going to come to terms and say, look, we don't have our first round pick for this coming draft. It's going to be a top 5, top 6 pick. That's not good. What we do have is Herb Jones and Trey Murphy, and we want to build around Derek Queen, and we want to build around Jeremiah Fears. And we think in order to do that, number one, we need to open up the floor, we need to open up those minutes, and we need to move off of Zion. And number two, we want to get off of his contract because we want to be able to, at some point, maybe make another trade, or at some point, maybe utilize that $40+ million elsewhere. And the Wizards are sitting there saying, hey, man, look what we just did for the Hawks. We had an expiring contract for a veteran. We didn't want him. I know you guys don't want him for the future, and he's not going to be on your team next year. But the cap space that you're going to be able to free up from us being able to offload that salary is massive. And I think that's the main thing if you're in New Orleans is, look, you gave him this incentive-filled contract with he has to play X amount of games. Like, when you're the Pelicans, I feel like when you do that for a player, it probably might not work out. I'll talk about the incentives in Zion's contract, but it's basically like, look, we know you're probably going to get injured at some point. We need some, a backup option, a plan B if that happens, so this doesn't fully backfire, and we don't have to pay you $50 million in full when you're sitting on the bench missing more than half of our games. So we'll talk about that in a second, but if you're the Pelicans, you can get off of that massive contract if you don't think he's part of your future. You can free up minutes to develop guys like Queen and Fears and build around Trey Murphy and Herb Jones and etc. Your new draft picks in the future. And they're sort of moving from the old front office because, don't forget, David Griffin, their old GM that drafted Zion and all those guys, is gone. Joe Dumars is now in charge there. He didn't draft Zion. He has no loyalty to him. We see this around the league all the time. The only player remaining from when Will Dawkins took over 2 summers ago is Anthony Gill. And it's not because his skill, it's because he's just a great guy in that locker room. He just traded Corey Kispert, who was the only draft pick on the team that he didn't make. And so when you consider all of that, it makes sense for the Pelicans, if they are ready and willing to move off of Zion, to go to a suitor that can match the salaries and give back an expiring to take on the additional years of Zion's contract. The Wizards have that in Chris Middleton, who I believe is making $34 million this year. I could be wrong. Yeah, $33.2 million this year, and is an unrestricted free agent, expiring contract. And if you just do, I'm going to get into the trade, possible trade packages a little earlier, I guess, than I thought I would, but why not? If you just did straight up Chris Middleton for Zion, and I'm not saying that's the package I would say, but just bear with me, that works financially. That's the centerpiece of the trade right there. The Wizards get Zion. They're getting the way better player, but they're also taking on an additional 2 years of his contract. And the Pelicans are getting off of his contract pretty much completely. A contract that with the rate that he plays, or I guess doesn't play at, the amount of money he's making, it's probably considered one of the worst contracts in the league. It's not because he's not a good player. It's because he can't stay healthy. It's the same thing with Trae Young. And the Wizards are taking that off their hands. And now, I think if you're Washington, it's not like a Trae Young scenario where you would have to take back draft capital to acquire a contract like Zion's. I think based on the structure of the contract, the Wizards would have to give up draft capital. I think it wouldn't be as big as you expect for a player that was as highly touted as Zion, that's made an All-NBA like Zion. But the Wizards, I think, would have to. And I don't know if it was in Josh's article about the first round pick that they have that is the worst of, I believe, the Clippers, the Rockets, and the Thunder. And again, the lottery, like 15 to 30 after the lottery in the NBA, is all based on regular season record. It's not based on the NBA Finals winner like the NFL or championship winner. So, based on how it's going, the OKC Thunder are going to probably be the best team. They'll get the 30th pick, and that'll go to the Washington Wizards. So, if the Wizards were to say, hey, man, you don't have a first round pick in this draft, we can give you that first round pick that we know is probably going to be 28, 29, or most likely 30. And we'll give you Anthony Gill. And if you still need something, then you got like AJ Johnson's of the world that you can throw in there if they want to maybe, try to take on that project and try to hone in his skills. You could throw in, another guy at the end of your bench like Malachi Branham who's expiring. You don't have to though. That's just if they have value in those guys, you can throw them in. I wouldn't throw in a Champagnie. There's no point in doing that. The money works with Middleton and Zion straight up. But if they do want another young player, it won't be any of the Wizards' young core. They're not going to trade any of those pieces. That's not happening. Anyone that was drafted by Will Dawkins, I would be so surprised if you were going to deal them to any team, let alone trade for a guy like Zion. I think would be crazy because you don't have to. So I think most likely trade package, and again, this is keep in mind is still a long shot. We've really only seen the Athletics preliminary report and nothing more from Shams or any other big time insiders. Middleton and that 2026 first round pick via OKC, Houston, or the Clippers, most likely via OKC for Zion, I think makes sense. Definitely makes sense, I think, for the Wizards. And that's granted the Wizards are interested and really want Zion in this deal. Now, if you're the Pelicans, you're going to get some heat for this. Like, that was your number one pick. And 5.5 years in, you are trading him to basically dump salary. Like, that's a terrible look. But I get it, right? He can't stay healthy. When he is healthy, he produces, but it's not like that production has led to anything more than a first round exit and like an 8 seed in the playoffs. So it's not like you really have anything through those 5.5, 6 years to really say, hey, we need to stick with this guy and we need to keep building around him. You know what I mean? I feel like if they're ready to move off, then this is a package they're going to get because I don't know what other teams are trading for him. Again, if he has a lot of interest around the league and they're like, we want the best package and not necessarily the one that'll get us off his contract long term, then the Wizards probably can't compete with other buyers. If they're not willing to put in any of their ones, they're not willing to put in any of their young core, they probably can't make a package better than others. But if there's not much interest, like there wasn't in Trae Young, and the Wizards are like, look, we really can't compete with a team that's going to give you multiple ones, but we have this late first round pick that we can give you via OKC, and we can give you an expiring contract to get off the last 2 years of Zion's deal. Take it or leave it. If you're the Pelicans, you want to get off the deal. It's a perfect match for you. And instead of buying out Middleton, the Wizards get some value for him. So that's what I think the package would be. That's sort of a baseline and background on why it might make sense for the Wizards and why it might make sense for the Pelicans. Again, both teams have to be at that point where it makes sense for both to agree on it. And I'm sure, like, I think the deadline is early February. It's the 4th or the 6th or sometime in the first week of February. So by that point, I'm sure in the next 2-3 weeks, you'll start to see talks heat up. If this is real, you'll probably start to see reports about Zion, but other people as well on the Wizards, on the Pelicans, etc. Rebuilding teams that are willing to part with people or willing to take back big contracts. And that's another big thing with the Wizards trading Jordan Poole is, yes, you were able to trade CJ in order to get Trae Young, but now you don't owe Jordan Poole all that money next year. Instead, it's going to Trae, and you have Middleton from that Kuzma trade that's expiring. I think Kyle still has one more year left on his deal, and you're able to offload that expiring. So again, like a lot of times on rebuilding teams, these expiring deals just expire or they get bought out, and it's not much to it. But if the Wizards are able to dump Middleton too, that would just be a phenomenal transaction in and of itself. Like, you got 34-year-olds in McCollum and Middleton. They're clearly not what they used to be. They're making $34 million this season. I think McCollum was 30, Middleton's 33. And you're able to actually get value for them in these trades. Like that would be pretty good, right? And again, if you don't want Zion, then it's not good. But hopefully what I say next might change your mind. But that's a little bit of a background as to why these teams might do it. Now let's talk about Zion's contract because I think, again, I didn't know any of this until I started doing some research today. But I think the general public is probably, I guess, as misinformed or ignorant to his contract as I was 6 hours ago before I looked at it. So by no means, if you didn't know any of this, it's not like you should have because I didn't either. But I went on Spotrac. Very interestingly enough, Zion is owed $39.5 million this year. Um, and then in 2026-27, he's owed $42 million. But 40% of that contract, the contract, by the way, for 2026-27, and then the final year, 27-28 at $45 million, are both non-guaranteed. And it's not like it's a partial guarantee. It's non-guaranteed, but there are some contingencies. 40% of his salary becomes guaranteed if the season before he plays more than 41 games. So again, for his contract next year, for example, he's owed $42 million. He's at 29 games right now, and I believe the Pelicans have about 37, 38 games remaining. So if he plays in more than 12 of those games, that would be 42 on the year if he plays 13 or more, then 40% of the 2026-27 salary would become fully guaranteed, which I don't know what that number is. I'm not good at math, but you can calculate it out of 42 if you want. But that's what the cap hit would be for Zion. And so if that's what you're talking about, I just did the math quickly, 16.8 million. So if Zion plays more than 41 games this season, it's only $16.8 million that is guaranteed in that contract, which is fascinating, honestly, that they negotiated it like that. That's roughly 17 million guaranteed. But I guess if you were to release him, then you would only pay him the 17 and the rest would not have to be paid. And then I don't know if that means that the following season, 27-28, is also not guaranteed. I don't know if it would carry over and then they would also be on the 40% for the following year if with a new team he plays for that. I don't know what that's about, but I included it to say, like, yes, his cap hit is 42 and 45 million. But it's not like if the Wizards wanted to get off of his contract after a season that they would have trouble doing so, or if they needed to eat the money that they would have trouble doing so. Because let's say that the Wizards trade for Zion. Again, he'd probably have a similar treatment to Trae Young. He really doesn't play too much towards the end of the season. They want to protect that top 8 protected pick. Then you're sad at, okay, with both him and Trae, like maybe Trae opts into the player option. Zion's at 42 million next year. You play him the entire 26-27 season because, again, you have the cap space to take him on as well as Trae Young at that cap figure and have that salary floor be nowhere near the luxury tax because everyone else is realistically on vet minimums or rookie deals. So, like, you have the luxury of doing this before extensions kick in for Sarr, Koulibaly, and others. And let's say that is what you do. You take it back Zion. He would have that 26-27 year to sort of see if he fits in with the young core. And then let's say it doesn't work out. Let's say he again can't stay healthy, which would be unfortunate. And let's say he plays less than 41% of the games. The following season's 45 million, you could cut him. And I'm not a cap expert, but based on what I read, you wouldn't owe him any of it. It's not guaranteed unless he hits that kicker, and then only 40% comes guaranteed. And then even let's say he plays 42 or more games that season, and the Wizards are still like, look, we really don't want to move forward with him. We want to try to contend with other pieces. We have extensions that we want to give out to guys. We're going to cut him and we're going to eat it. That would be roughly like anywhere from $18 to $20 million, I would assume, if that's the 40%. And again, it's not ideal, but it's not the worst thing in the world. So again, I think a lot of people are turned off by the injuries, and I'll get to that in a second. But the contract history and sort of what he would be owed in terms of $87 million over the next 2 years, that's very daunting to a lot of people, given the injury history and given all of those circumstances. But I don't think it's as daunting as you think if you hear some of those scenarios where if they do want to move on, I think they could at not the worst loss or the worst deficit, which again might be another thing that's enticing for them. He's still 25 years old, by the way. It's his 6th year in the league. He's had a lot of injuries, but he's still 25. And if the Wizards are like, hey, he's still 25, and we really think that he could fit in here and we could get a steal at a really good value, get a guy that when he's healthy, was an all NBA player, has never had a season, I think, below 20 points per game in his NBA career. And the Wizards are like, look, same thing with Trae Young. We want to bring him in, see what it's like. We have the ability to with our cap space because we manage it so well. We'd only give up like a late first round pick this year. And again, for people that might not want to trade that first, basically the Wizards got that at last year's deadline for Jared Butler. Like they took on Reggie Jackson's contract for the rest of the year so the Sixers can make more deals, and then they bought him out. But you also just basically got that pick for free. And Jared Butler's a good player, but again, didn't clearly wasn't a part of the Wizards' future plan. So it's like if you included Chris Middleton and Jared Butler for Zion Williamson, like you would say a million times out of 10. So I don't think you should hold that against Will Dawkins because he got it at incredible value. Because if he trades Jared Butler, who he got that first round pick for, and Chris, you're like, that is an absolute steal. So I wouldn't get held up on that. Especially if they're into Zion, that is unreal value for him. And so hopefully that contract stuff makes sense. And now you got to address the elephant in the room. Like I mentioned, the games missed, right? He has played more than 65 games just one time in his 6 NBA seasons. And I'm counting this season too, because I think at this point, I don't know. I think it's still possible for him to play 65, but at the rate he's at, he's definitely not on pace to hit the 65 game threshold. He played just 59 games total between the start of last season and through more than half of this season. Just 59 of those games. It's probably 59 out of like 125 or so games that his team has played, which again is less than half. I think that's not good, and it's pretty clear that it's not good. Is battled weight issues. I think there's a stipulation in his contract that he has to be below a certain weight. I kind of want to pull up the contract because I want to get the weight right because I thought that part was fascinating too. Again, it's like clearly the injury history is a concern because the contract that the Pelicans put together was solely based on that. Like there's again, I think he has to weigh less than 295 pounds for the I guess for the contract and the guarantees stipulations to hold up, which 295 for an NBA player is crazy. His body fat needs to be monitored. Again, he's had foot injuries, he's had knee injuries, he's had other issues in terms of just can't stay healthy. And so when you consider all of that, the contract he's on, I understand if you're like, hey, stay away. There's no point. The rebuild's going well. Do not put yourself in a financial hole. Don't allow him to take up shots and reps from other guys at the forward. I completely understand that. And also should have mentioned his contract for next season becomes fully guaranteed on the 15th of July. So again, the Wizards can go through free agency, they can go through the draft process, and that's all before deciding to guarantee his contract. Again, if he plays more than 41 games this year, that's about $16.8 million cap hit. If they don't guarantee it, they just have to pay him that and move on, which they wouldn't do. They're not going to trade for Zion and then cut him. Like that's not going to happen. So maybe that happens the following year. That would be roughly 20 million. But again, it basically cuts it in half for how much you thought that they would have to be paying him if he doesn't work out in a year or two versus what they are paying him realistically, considering if he does play a lot of games or if he doesn't play enough games. And so I thought that was interesting and definitely needed to include that. That brings me to this, right? When Zion's fully healthy, he's exciting. And a fully healthy Zion that gets me somewhere in terms of my excitement around this rebuild. I think the rebuild will be fine without him. I think they're in a really good spot. But if Will Dawkins sees something in Zion Williamson, if you're a Wizards fan, based on what Dawkins has done to this point, you gotta trust it. I'm not telling Wizards fans what to do. I'm not doing that. But if it were me, right, I would question the deal. And I've talked about that. I talked about the contract. I talked about its injury history. I like the state that the rebuild is in. So there would certainly be questions to be asked. Would Zion play enough? Would you be in cap hell with that contract? Does he fill a position of need? You have Keyshawn George. You have Bilal Coulibaly, who are probably your forwards. You have Alex Sarr. If you draft the Dabansa or you draft the Boozer, where is everyone fitting in? That's also a concern. So there would definitely be questions about it. But when he's healthy, Zion's really good. I think his last fully healthy season was 23-24. 23 points per game, 6 rebounds, 57% from the field, all NBA, all star, pretty unstoppable and pretty dominant, right, during that season. Um, but it's few and far between. That's realistically what you're gonna get. You're gonna get some real good production when he plays, but is he gonna play? That's the more concerning part, isn't like what he does when he plays. It's the amount that he doesn't do when he's off the court, not helping your team at the cap figure that he's on for this season and the next two. That probably has some people scared. Um, where would he fit? You're probably asking, Greg, where would he fit in terms of that? I touched on it a second ago. You obviously would assume Trae Young is your point guard. And then Trey Johnson, I think they would ideally like to start at the two, but things can change. Keyshawn George is one of your forwards. I would assume if you're trading for Zion, you want him to start. He's your other forward, and you have Sarr at center. And again, if you're sat there saying we need more defense or we need to start Bilal Coulibaly, then you just put him in at the guard, Keyshawn at the three, Zion at the four, or vice versa, and then Sarr at the five. You have Trey Johnson, you have Bub Carrington, Champagnie, etc. Will Riley and whoever you draft in this year's draft coming off the bench. And again, that's a lot of mouths to feed. But if the Wizards truly believe in Zion Williamson, I can get there. I know Teleonsis is 100% going to be down because I know he was happy that Trae Young is going to sell some tickets, put some butts in seats at Capital One. Zion Williamson would do that double. Like just the possibility of the big Zion dunk, the poster that everyone talks about, the electricity that occurs when he goes up for a dunk, when he jumps, when he has the emphatic blocks, like that would get people around this team. And if you go into next season, you trade for Zion. Let's say it's Chris Middleton. We'll even throw AJ Johnson in there and that 30th pick from OKC. You're rolling out a starting lineup of Trae Young, Bilal Coulibaly, Keyshawn George, Zion Williamson, and Alex Sarr. You got Trey Johnson, Bub Carrington, Will Riley, Champagnie, and your top 8 pick. I got to say top 8, but probably top 5 pick in the draft. And you're trying to at least compete. You're not rebuilding anymore. Like, that is intriguing. That's enticing. It is by no means a title contending team. I think it's definitely a playing team if they stay healthy, and that's a big if they stay healthy. But it's possibly a top 6 team in the East, possibly a playoff team. There's a lot of ifs there because we don't know what the Wizards can do on a consistent level. We saw a stretch where they went 7-5, but we don't know how much they can do that. We don't know how Zion and Trey would mesh because Trey hasn't played a game for the Wizards and won't until the All-Star break and maybe not even after that. Zion Williamson hasn't played with any of these guys. Like maybe it takes a while to mesh. Maybe it's just a disaster. But I think on paper, not only would it possibly work, but you would get the fan base back. You'd get them excited. You get them engaged. And for that, I think ownership would definitely be on board. If Will Dawkins is also on board, Michael Winger, Travis Schlenk, they're on board too, and they think it makes sense. I think value-wise, you do it in a second. Rebuilding-wise, I could see why you'd say you hang up in a second because I like the things I mentioned, the injury history alone, but the contract and just like, does he really fit what you're trying to build here? Are you trying to, reconcile that failed project in New Orleans and just bank on him being healthy in DC? Is that detrimental to development of your other guys and your draft pick this year? Like, I get all of those questions, and I think it would be a very polarizing move that, either Will Dawkins looks like a genius or he looks like he reached a little bit too early in the rebuild. But what I keep coming back to is, so what if he reaches a little too much? With the contract, you're only paying basically half that if you have to cut ties with him in 27, 28. And it's not like you're giving up anything of value. AJ Johnson, and again, he might not even be in the package, but it's not like he's the centerpiece. Chris Middleton is going to be gone. He is the Wizards are 10-32. Chris Middleton has 39 games left in a Wizards uniform, and then he's going to be a free agent, and he'll go probably play elsewhere, or he'll retire. I don't know what he'll do, but he's not part of your future. And the 30th pick, I'm sorry, I would trade the 30th pick for Zion if my GM was on board any day of the week. If he thought it was a good fit, that's good value. So if it doesn't work out, I understand the skeptics, and I understand the people that maybe aren't, open to that idea. But if it doesn't work out, it's not like it's a backfired move. Like when the Hawks traded multiple ones for Dejounte Murray. The Knicks are looking real dumb for trading, I think, 4 or 5 first-round picks, 4 of which unprotected to the Nets for Mikal Bridges. Like, those are trades where if you're wrong about your evaluation of that player you're bringing in and you think very highly of them and you're wrong, that could set your franchise back years. that could get the GM fired. The Zion trade, if it is what I think it is package wise, and again, still a long shot worth mentioning, that isn't that type of deal. And at the value that I think Zion still has at 25, I can talk myself into this trade. Would I make it? I would not. I would not make this trade. I wouldn't say, hey, I'm going out and I want Zion. I think if I'm Will Dawkins though, and New Orleans is like, hey man, we just need an expiring deal like Middleton. And apart from that, realistically, we just need that late first round pick or even 2 second round picks, and we're down to do it. If you're a Will Dawkins man and you say yes to that, I can't tell you you're wrong, and time will tell if you are right or wrong. But um, value wise, it makes sense, and so hopefully that's a good enough breakdown of this move. Again, I'm not saying that it's a bad trade if the Wizards do it. It's not a move I would necessarily seek out. I could understand it though, and I think based on what I've seen from Zion, just how cool the dunks are and the star power and all that, like you would be crazy to not be excited about the possibility of bringing him into DC, let alone for the value that you could probably bring him into DC for. And again, we don't know what that value is, but based on my speculation, that value would be pretty low, and it would be pretty good for the Wizards to just take back a player that maybe, who knows, maybe just needed a new change of scenery, maybe needed some different schemes, some time to develop in the league, and then he ascends. You know, maybe you look like a genius, Will Dawkins, if you pull this off. But again, like I mentioned multiple times, it's a long shot. It's just preliminary reports from the Athletic, and so if this picks up steam, just like if the Trae Young stuff, when it did pick up steam, we recorded more pods and talked about it more. That will be the case. But for now, I wanted to get something out because I think it's noteworthy enough to talk about it. I've seen some talk online, and I just wanted to sort of give some background in terms of the reporting, the contract details, the games missed, and sort of my thoughts on it. So that's probably going to wrap it up for this episode. Again, like I mentioned, a pretty short episode in terms of usually about 30 minutes, but I wanted to get it out there. I wanted to share my thoughts on Zion. Let me know. This is my favorite part of YouTube now that I have comments and I can interact with you guys like on the actual pod itself. Let me know in the comments if you think the Wizards should trade for Zion. Again, like if you have a different trade package in mind than mine, let me know. If you think I'm stupid for my thoughts on Zion and you think they should 100% make the trade, which again, I wouldn't tell you you're wrong for. I think it would be a solid trade. Then you can let me know that as well. But again, let me know what you think in the comments. That's going to wrap it up for this episode. I will be back on Thursday night, I believe, to recap that game against Denver. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Wizards podcast. As always, thanks for listening. Go Wiz.